My name is Zachary Omet, and for my disaster analysis project, I'm going to be covering the BP drilling accident, which is took place in the movie Deepwater Horizon. So, our first sign we're going to be, or excuse me, first scene we're going to be going over is the BP's VIP. They came, visit, and then they completely skipped over some early warning signs. So the BP exclusive wanted to do a tour around the oil rig. So just a victory lap because this Deepwater Horizon at the time was way ahead of any other um, technology for deepwater drilling like that. And crazy safety measures were in place, similar to the Titanic, which same thing with the Deepwater Horizon. They said it could never sink. Nothing could go wrong. There's too many safety things. So Mr. Jimmy is the BP VP previously mentioned, and he's really pushing for a negative pressure test. So they just talk about they're way behind schedule. They won't be able to do. They're already months behind schedule. They don't have time for this negative pressure test. So, and then also he gets a cement test denied. So that's two very important things with pipe construction, and then obviously construction of the whole frame of the oil platform. Very big steps they're over skipping in for sake of time and getting this oil rig open quickly. So this is a rather slow onset technical disaster. There's lots of little things like just a ton of little tests being skipped over for the sake of time, but that really did no one any good. And you can see that the leadership is already kind of falling through the cracks. A good leader in this situation would say, no, we have to run these tests. I don't feel safe having a crew out here. The hazards, and you have to treat this risk like a dynamic threat. It's changing. Just because something works the first time you set it up doesn't mean it will be fine down the road. So dynamic tests, and having obviously this rig is rather new from the time of the Deepwater Horizon movie because they're not done with it yet. So this is a new crew. They're not the greatest trained in emergency management. They possibly don't know what to do down the road, which we will talk about what they end up having to do down the road. So obviously we talked about for our first scene, they talk about all these tests they're skipping over for sake of time because they're already months behind schedule. So that was their first thing they went wrong. And there's no authority on the rig. There's no clear, who's in charge if stuff goes wrong. There's just a lot of different people ahead of a lot of different departments, but nobody's completely ahead of the whole thing. So, and we just see the outside pressure here. It's a massive storyline from this movie how outside pressure can influence something like this. So that's our first scene, kind of setting up. We see all the pressure. So eventually, they do end up doing a negative pressure test, which blows back mud, which is not what they would like. That's not good. And let me make sure I have a good explanation for why the mud's bad. So basically, the pressure in the piping is not equalizing out. It's blowing back mud. That's not good. It's dangerous. It could result in a blowout. It's almost like a bladder effect. It would be a good way to describe this. So we can see when this scene happens, there's workers in the pipe housing area who get injured, clearly not prepared for this blowback to happen where mud starts shooting up. And, they're seeing on the control panels inside that's going the warning. It's going from, normal to yellow, which would be the warning range. Nobody does anything because Mr. Jimmy in the control room is pushing because he wants to make sure this is good and not a false reading. So he pushes through to get this negative test done, which ends up hurting a worker and eventually kind of starts the whole slide into, this whole disaster that occurred. The question that kind of brought up when I watched this scene from the movie And what made it pop out of my mind that it'd be good for this is who's making the decision on this. And this kind of goes back to what I said earlier, how there's all these different branches of the deep water, working for the Deepwater Horizon well, but no one really seems to be in control of them. And not having someone in control would be a catastrophic failure of decision making. Emergency management, nothing set up because emergency management always starts before the emergency happens. You know, if you're just behind the curve trying to, save yourself, save whatever you can do, instead of having a plan and knowing exactly what to do, that's an issue. So that's a big issue. And that's what, in essence, we saw occur during this movie. So that was our second scene, the negative pressure test with mud blowback that ended up hurting somebody and then we just see, who has a final call when it comes to decision making in this well. So, all right. So, this is the iconic scene from the movie is the blowout, which led to a fireball eruption. Obviously, oil meets air with spark. But so mud erupts to the deck. The engine overspeeds from the pump. The entire rig explodes into a massive fireball. Is basically what ends up happening here. I'm sure you guys know what a fireball looks like. But so obviously a big fireball, everything goes crazy, and now we don't have the steps in place. So this is our real. So we don't have the steps, but that doesn't matter at this point. This is our response time. What do we do? So, and that being said, emergency alarms are late. The crews are all forced to improvise. There's a lot of improvising going on in this survival situation, which is always less than ideal. And as emergency management or emergency manager, going into the field, I would not be able to do my job without having a plan in sense, a written plan, something I can go off of. Because having to try to be in their shoes with no plan, nothing, sounds like a nightmare to me. And I don't know how they did this. So obviously alarms are late. People are rushed. It's a mess. So obviously once the crew enters critical crisis mode, they're going to have to evacuate the rig, but there's not a plan to do that, which is just one of the deadliest mistakes that they made here. So then we see social vulnerability, or valuability, sorry. The injured crew is, the number one focus to get off this ship. That's who they want off this ship. They're trying to, rig. They're trying to protect them. They want them to go. They want to try to save their lives. And then convenience, they're obviously, if someone's in an easier to reach position, they're trying to get them off quicker. So, and then our final stage is the evacuation, lifeboat, and recovery scene. The rig is burning uncontrollably currently because, there's just oil coming straight out. So the remaining crew attempts to abandon the platform, jump in the water, save themselves. But, But again, they don't have that plan. So they don't know who's going in what lifeboat, how many people can even fit in a lifeboat. So, looking at this whole thing, it just shows your breakdown of your plan. Well, obviously they did not have a plan, but if they were to have some type of plan in place, you can see how easy it doesn't take. One step going wrong could easily send you way off track and get you into a unfavorable situation like this, because plans are great, but that's why real life training is so important, to know what to do if something goes wrong from your plan so you can't follow it perfectly. So obviously rescue scene, but responders are late to get there because their main communication was blown off during the explosion. So this is another important thing that I learned in this class and I thought was very valuable, is to have two lines, at least two forms of communication, solid, quick forms of communication that can get you help quickly when needed. For our other project in class, I wrote about the Oklahoma City bombing, and a major takeaway reading an after-action report from that bombing was they didn't have the proper communication. Once the bomb exploded, they knocked out all the phone lines in the area, so no one really knew what was going on. And walkie talkies get so distorted. You need to set up a direct line of communication. But so what happened from this tragedy was disaster training in offshore rigs went way up because you can see how quickly being stuck on a burning chunk of metal can be very bad for you. They trained recovery after this, Coast Guard, all necessary parties involved to help save people working these rigs. And obviously, just coordination was one of the main takeaways from this movie. And people learned a lot, which is often, unfortunately, lessons are learned in blood and emergency management. And this is a great example of, kind of a new thing, offshore drilling. But yeah, so ultimately, I thought this was a really great movie for this class. It just embodied, you know, dealing with emergency, what it's like to be during one, what it's like for you to not have a plan, try to come up with everything. And it really makes you think, big picture, what's greatest for everybody, what decision I make, how is that going to affect this person, and myself. So, going forward, first off, always have a plan. That's been established. And just knowing what to do when something goes wrong is so important in this job. And it's, the broad speaks, it's probably the most important thing. But, kind of the backpack off that, what would you do if the plan you practice doesn't go right? So don't just have your, mandatory training, once a year and just do that same thing that, check a box off. It needs to be every year something different and something a little different. So, they try to build in routines, but they can't because, little things are going wrong. So, yeah, so that's my review of this movie. I thought it was a great movie. Definitely very interesting because I've seen a little bit of this movie before I took this class, and it's definitely changed like how I look at an event like this. Like I was just trying to, I'd always look at it in my shoes, but now I'm looking at it, what would I do? Try to help others. How could this be avoided? How can I go forward? So I really enjoyed it. It was a fun experience. So yeah, thanks for watching.